Well, hello and welcome to the Mind Science Institute, and Richard Hill sending his what's been happening this week in research and investigation and what's going on. Now, I found a couple of things and I started to think about them and added a few together, but the one that got my thinking going was an article here in Epilepsy and Behaviour by Andres Canna. And it's, is it time to train neurologists in the management of mood and anxiety disorders? Now, this seems like an extraordinarily good idea. Neurologists are terrific. They do a great job. But the people they're dealing with usually have something pretty severe going on in their experience. And how much of this is actually exacerbating some of the conditions they're dealing with? Now, this particular one, they were looking at epilepsy, and they were looking at behaviour there. And they were talking about the impacts that that anxiety and depression have on, let me see, they talk about the response to pharmacotherapy and the anti-epileptic drugs, the tolerance to the anti-epileptic drugs, post-surgical seizures outcomes and from epilepsy surgeries, and mortality risks. Now, this is a very personal story for me because my daughter actually had a seizure. It turned out to be in response to an astroglioma in her brain, which turned out to be operable, and everything sort of came good in the long run. But she would come back to me and say, "Dad, my neurologist told me this and this and this and this," which were all good bits of information, and they were very reliable and very high quality. She said, "But what does that mean for me?" And so I would then explain to her, well, this is going to make you feel like this. This is going to make you seem like that. People are going to respond to you like this. And it was these helps, these assistances of how the neurology was important to human behaviour that was really something that benefited her. And in fact, I had a phone call from her. She was overseas at the time. I had a phone call of her having an anxiety attack. She didn't want to go home and upset her husband, and we actually did an anti-anxiety treatment, the process, over the phone. And to what degree and where else could she find that assistance? So this idea that perhaps not just in the sense of what this article is talking about here, about the improvements of responses, but perhaps it's just about time we realise that people going through neurological illnesses, and certainly things like epilepsy and so on and so forth, need to have that understanding. Now, there are a couple of things that came to my mind there. There was also this week, it was a review of the effects of exercise interventions on challenging behaviour for people with intellectual disabilities. So here again, a neurological aspect where all kinds of discomforts and depressions and anxieties and concerns are expressed. And what's the benefits for exercise interventions? So these types of processes that are beyond just the pharmacological sort of insights and achievements. And it reminded me of an article. I'm just trying to get the page up here. I've stuck together my pages really well. It reminded me of something from 2007, the Journal of Clinical Psychiatry, and it was actually a discussion between a group of doctors. It was brought together by Michael Otto, and I'll give the references. You can go and look at it, and it's really terrific. It's just these 6 fabulous experts on the nature of anxiety, of stress, of affective disorders, and the importance of exercise in relation to those. 2007. Now, these guys are all doctors, they're all neurologists, and they know what they're doing. Perhaps we should all be informed more about this. So those are my bits and pieces. That's the what's going on, what to think about, and this idea of seeing one paper and then maybe another paper and then remembering one that you saw before. This is the way we put together a good knowledge of what we're doing. It's about having the knowledge base from which to work to create collected amounts of information and then processes that we move forward with. And just one thing, a quick one. What's going on? Well, how about I blow my own trumpet? I've been doing for PDP seminars, it's in Sydney and in Melbourne, but I've been doing a series of neuroscience. So I do neuroscience 101, 201 and 301. So 101 is for those who don't know much, and it's the architecture and the biology of the brain and how it works. 201 is affective disorder, and 301 is psychopathological disorders. But anyway, I've got the 201 and 301. We're doing those together in 31st of May, 1st of June in Sydney. Now go to PDP seminars and have a look at that, and maybe if you're in Sydney or thereabouts you might come along. But we're going to be in Melbourne doing 101 on the 25th of July and 201 and 301 on the 15th and the 16th of August. And I'd like to think that I do a pretty good program and pull together, as I was saying, about these processes, about looking at various papers and bringing together. I like to think I do the same thing with the vast degree and variety of information packages that I've been studying over the last 10 years. So for now, from Richard Hill here outside again, I thought that would be a nice idea. Be well, be creative, be wonderful, and have a great week. Bye-bye. Well, hello everybody. Richard Hill from the Mind Science Institute here, looking at another week of fascinating stuff. I've been having a number of conversations over email and various ways with a good friend of mine, Alan Ivey, Emeritus Professor at Massachusetts University. There's wonderful work, micro skills in counselling, brilliant man. And what Alan, and through some of our interactions, is becoming particularly interested in, and it's wonderful to see, is this area of the metabolism, of the body functions and the nature of the way the brain works. And it's really important. So I just want to highlight one of the things. It's not a new one. It's actually from 2012, December 2012, and it's the Scientist magazine. I'll have the reference down below. This magazine article has other references that you can follow, but it's looking at this nature of the way in which our metabolism, our body functions, actually are important to our brain. Remember the whole problem with the dualism is the brain and the body are not necessarily directly affecting each other, but as I say so often, look at this, it's connected and it's hollow. So what are some of the things? And I've just made a few notes. Always, it's really important to remember, and always to preface these things, association is not necessarily cause, but association can also reflect a relationship, a integration, a part of the interplay. So there are a number of things you have to think about. What is direct, what is single-stepped, what is actually a broader aspect of it. But there are so many things we're seeing now in relation to various more serious things, quite serious things, schizophrenia, bipolar, ADHD, but also just straight up things, the affective depressions, stress, anxiety, do have a direct relationship to metabolic processes and lifestyle practices. Certainly the first thing you should do if someone comes in with a negative, with a down, with a depressed mood, or even with a psychopathological disorder, is get them to make sure, get them to have some exercise. Go for a walk. Give a good hour-long, strong, energetic walk. And what are some of the things they talk about? Depression. People with depression are 60% more likely to have problems with diabetes too. This also you can see with schizophrenia and other psychotic diseases, particularly from the medications, the second generation antipsychotics. They tend to give problems in the metabolism, whereas we used to give them heart attacks, now we give them diabetes too with these medications. And insulin resistance is one of the really important things to understand. This nature of where the insulin receptors in the body shut down in order to cope with the excessive amount of sugar, or the excessive, which of course stimulates insulin, because the insulin grabs the glucose, runs around to the cell. If there are receptors, it chucks the glucose into the cell, but if there are no receptors, it then takes that glucose off and deposits it in adipose tissue, in the fat tissue. And so if the cells have got plenty of energy and plenty of food, then we start to put on weight. But equally, if we overdose with sugar, as we do when we have these huge processed, a big chocolate bar, then what it does is it freaks out the cells, and what we have evolved very successfully and quite appropriately is when there is an excess, it's safer to shut down the receptive system, the receptors, because it might be that this excess is a poison. Equally, we have it when we have a lack. When we have a lack of things, we also shut down the receptors and the receiving, because we might be in a famine or another ecological crisis. So this insulin resistance builds up, and in this case, the glucose comes along with the insulin. The insulin says, no receptors, I'm taking it away. But the cell actually says, yeah, I've shut down receptors because you freaked me out because there's so much of you, but actually I still need food. So 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes later, you're feeling hungry again, and off you go and you have another chocolate bar. And so suddenly you find you've had lots of chocolate bars, you're actually not getting any more energy, and you're packing on the pounds. But the impact in the brain of excessive insulin is so interesting. We used to think that insulin didn't get into the brain, but about 30, 40 years ago we figured out that insulin does actually pass through the blood-brain barrier. Then we didn't think it did much particularly, but then we found insulin receptors, and particularly in the midbrain area in relation to dopaminergic processes, dopaminergic areas in the midbrain. And we found certainly that if you reduce the numbers of receptors, that you actually dysregulate or disorganize the appetitive process, and so people will eat more. So it's not only the insulin resistance in the body, it's also a shift of insulin reception in the brain, and all this leads to more appetite, and all this leads to more fat, all these problems, all these things of we are not designed to eat the food that is presented to us in the snack bar. Also, just adding on to that, don't forget that we also talk about cytokines, the inflammatory processes. They stimulate glial, microglia, and give all kinds of problems there. So we need to balance ourselves with food, with diet, with exercise, with sleep. They're the first things. Then we may actually have to come in with processes like medications to try and get things in balance, but only to get them to stop the excesses, but to bring us back into sense. Then what we want to do is we want to then have good talk therapy so that we give ourselves balanced in the way we approach life. Quick one, because I'm talking lots. This wonderful thing in Australia, Sydney, Australia, done by the Childhood Trauma Foundation. Really important conference, on trauma, with everybody that you want to go and see. Dan Siegel, Ed Tronick, Alan Shaw, Dan Hughes. We got some Pat Ogden's coming. Who else is coming? Tronick, I said. Sue Carter and Stephen Porges. All the people that I pay thousands of dollars to go overseas to see coming here. It's going to cost you a little bit because we've got to fly them over, I suppose, but it's worth every penny. I've gone on too far, so I'll have a reference to that as well. Check it out. That's later on in the year, August. So in August, so plenty of time. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. See you later. Bye. Well, hello again from Richard Hill at the Mind Science Institute, and what's been going on this week in the wonderful area of neuroscience. Now, the thing that I found interesting was looking at, basically it's the principle of how much control do we have, or how much organisation do we have between our mind and our body systems. And in this case, this interesting little study by Matthias Cox and his group at the Raboud University in the Netherlands. They were looking at the nature of mind over immune system and the aspect of the immune system and resilience that comes from really strengthening up. Because what they looked at is an interesting guy, a Dutch celebrity daredevil. I love these things. Dutch celebrity daredevil Wim Hof, H-O-F. And apparently he's legendary. He goes up and sort of lies in the snow and sits in the cold. But he has this enormous resilience to outside, going into the outside, into nature, and surviving in very difficult circumstances. So they thought they'd test him and look at what was going on, and they tested his immune system. So they went in and they looked, and they found that his immune system was more resilient, more effective in relation to a particular immune system test that they had good back data of, and fairly large data of. So anyway, they thought, well, okay, maybe that's not enough. So they got a whole bunch of people to go off with Wim Hof and train in this sort of rigorous, harsh endurance type of training, and come back and do the test. And then they had a control group that were just ordinary, poor, Netherlandy people. And what they found was that the entire group of the ones who went on with Wim Hof, again, also had better response in their immune systems. Now, what's interesting is, as they looked at it, whether it was the endurance stuff, how much this harsh sort of resilience, that maybe just in the West we're too soft in what we do, but there was also a breathing process that was engaged, and the breathing process was terribly important in strengthening and engaging the immune system. And this all goes back to the enormous importance in understanding that macrophages, which of course are a vital part of our immune system upregulation when there are problems, that macrophages actually have receptors for neurotransmitters, and they actually have they secrete neurotransmitters. So there's a conversation between the brain and the immune system, a direct conversation. And can we enhance that? And how would we enhance it? Well, one of the ways, I suppose, to enhance it is activity-dependent responses. So obviously, if you're active, if you're working with your resilience, if you're out there in the environment, toughing it with a whole bunch of different stimuli, you may well enhance the nature of the receptors. And remember that receptors are the thing that determine how much something is noticed, not how much stuff is in there. It's the receptors that actually are the important thing. So if you increase gene expression to increase receptors then this will increase the degree of communication, the effectiveness of the communication between the brain and the immune system. So that's really cool. Now this has all been written up in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. Reference will be below. Have a look at that. Really interesting. Now, what's on? What's happening? By the way, this was initially in Nature News, called Behavioural Training Reduces Inflammation. So that's really interesting. That was the other thing. They found that the Wim Hof group had a higher regulation of anti-inflammatory interleukin-10, as different from the inflammatories of interleukin 1, 2 and 6. So that was interesting. That was interesting too. And mind and matter engaging, the capacity for activity-dependent gene expression through mental engagement. Really interesting. Now, what's something that's interesting going on? Now, here's a group that you may not have heard of, CARTA, C-A-R-T-A. Now, I'll read up their thing. It's the Centre for Academic Research and Training in Anthropogeny. Now, that's just looking, and they put it in there, to explore and explain the origins of the human phenomenon. Now, they're an interesting group. Go in there. I'll give the website below, and they have webinars, they have symposiums. They seem to have good support, so most of their stuff is free. You certainly can join for free and just check out their stuff. So go check them out. CARTA, they're very interesting. They've just done some interesting stuff on this anthropology of human development, and they have quite a history of that. So there we go. Are we too soft? Do we need to get out there and toughen it up a bit, be like Bear Grylls or something, and get out there and be a bit tougher? And where do we come from anyway? How is it that we make up our human existence? Those are a couple of things for this week. As always, be creative, create wonderful things, be wonderful, and see you next time. Bye. Well, hello everybody. Richard Hill from the Mind Science Institute, coming to you again this week on What's Interesting. And I found something that was rather curious. Now, science signalling, 27th of May, so right now, Volume 7, Issue 327, Stress Stops the Blood Flowing. Now, this was interesting, and it's talking not only about stress, but also, I think they're looking at, it was a rat model experiment, but on environmental stress, but general stress to the body, and looking at the blood flow that goes on in the brain. And what they looked at was the nature of the way stress altered the vasodilation in the brain and in brain areas. I made some notes here. Let me see. The neuronal activity. Now, that you have an upregulation of neuronal activity in a particular area. So that temporarily increases the blood flow to meet the increased metabolic demand. So obviously you have more activity, you need more oxygen, you need more various things going on, and it's astrocytes, of course, which are quite important in tending the area from the blood area through the blood-brain barrier and bringing these important elements down to the neurons so they can function and they have the various necessities. Now, of course, the important things is the ionic flow, the calcium and the potassium, your potassium plus and your calcium 2 plus, which depolarizes the experience for nerves and allows for action potential. So what happens when we have environmental stuff? Well, what happens when it's good, when everything's working well? It evokes a cascade of calcium activity in the astrocytes, which allows the astrocytes to release potassium into the extracellular space, and having increased potassium in the extracellular space changes the amount of movement of potassium into the cell so that we depolarize the neurons and we get activity. Now this happens because in the sense of blood flow, where the extra potassium in the extracellular space, it relaxes the smooth muscle cells around the arterioles, and that leads to vasodilation. That means to increased blood flow, and therefore the whole metabolistic process is enabled and given energetic focus and given energetic play. So that's what happens in the good case. Now what they found was under stress, and they used a variety of stress. They used electrical stimulation, they used a bunch of aspects. It's difficult because it's rat experiments, but I think we can probably extrapolate it out to broad-based stress of the tissue is going to lead to a situation where it's the glucocorticoid receptors, looking at the amygdala and the nature of and the hippocampus of the glucocorticoid receptors, which are important for the body to understand it's under stress and how it's going with stress. And if you don't have the vasodilation, you're not having the response and the reactivity to the stressful situation, and stressed rats and stressed brains are going to overreact or continue reacting or not be altered in their acting, because remember, in the amygdala, a lot of what calms the amygdala down is the activity in the GABAergic neurons. So you want a lot of activity going on, not only in the glutamatergic processes of action potential, but also the GABAergic actions of calming the processes. So what you need either way is vasodilation. You need activity, you need more oxygen, you need more nutrients, and all this comes from an unstressed system. The more stressed the system, the more restricted and constrained and undilated the vaso system is. Really interesting. Go check that one out. And what's going on? There's my other notes. Good friends of mine. This is something, oh gosh, I wish I was going to be there. And I've been invited to this wonderful conference, although unfortunately I'm double booked. It's the International Conference of Coping, Resilience and Hope in Hyderabad in India, and that's the 14th to the 16th of December. Now, I do a lot of work with this. This is a strengths-based resilience social work group based in Brisbane in Sydney, and they do things all around the world. I'm so disappointed not being able to go, but then I'm really excited because I'll be at the Ericsson conference and I'm speaking there on my curiosity approach. But they've got the opportunity for presenters and for papers and also for posters and also for some videos. Check them out. You'll see the video, the contact below. Abstracts close 15th of August, so there's a bit of time to get something in there. This is a great group of people. They're wonderful. Venkat Pula is one of the central organisers and my good friend. And there's lots of other people who I've got to know, particularly in that subcontinent area in India and Pakistan and all those wonderful places. As you know, I was in Nepal a little while ago and Sarajevo, so a little while before that with these people. So that's a really good, what a great title, the International Conference on Coping, Resilience and Hope. Wouldn't you want to be speaking there? So that's all for the moment. That's what's going on this week. As always, be creative, participate in the experience and do wonderful things. Bye-bye. Thank you.